Hi, welcome back, everybody, to Mr. Muller's seventh grade science class. We are going to dissect mushroom today. Okay, should be nice and simple. Should take a few minutes and should not be that complicated. I'm just going to make one cut and talk about the features of the mushroom. Should be simple as that. If we're in class, we'd be doing this lab. It's called "There's a Fungus Among Us." Classic stuff. All right, so I'm going to read from the top. Have you ever eaten a mushroom during a meal? If you have, you might be more familiar with fungi than you think. A mushroom is a type of fungus, right? Not all funguses are mushrooms, but all mushrooms are fungus, if that makes sense. Today, you're going to examine the structures of a fungus. So it says get a mushroom from your teacher, examine the outside surface. So here we have a basic white mushroom that you get from the grocery store. I don't think it's mature because you should be in this species you should be able to see the gills at the bottom, but we're going to actually when we carve it up, we'll be able to see the gills. I'll talk about that. But the part that sticks into the ground or sticks into whatever the mushroom is growing off of that it's consuming because it grows from what it is eating is obviously not entirely intact. It's been cut off because people usually don't eat that part. So this is the part of the bottom here is the stem, and it would be a lot longer. But for mushrooms that people eat at grocery stores, they cut it off. Okay, so I'm going to try to identify some parts of the mushroom that are listed on the table. You don't have this in front of you, but I can kind of put it up here. The three parts in the table, the three structures that I want you to identify are called the cap, stem, and the gills. Okay, and if you read the textbook, you read on page 67, there's a picture of a mushroom when you're reading about fungus from 66 to 69 on Wednesday. On page 67, there's a picture of a mushroom with those structures on it. So let's talk about those. Uh, where do you think the cap is? Okay. If you're looking at a mushroom, where do you think the cap is? Well, it makes sense that the cap is on top. And the cap is on top because it protects the mushroom and specifically it protects the gills, which create the spores for the mushroom to reproduce. So the cap is on top. The classic looking cap of a mushroom is sort of a protection. Okay. The stem, like I talked about at the beginning, the stem is this piece that would be at the bottom here that's been cut. Okay, that is what would be growing into the source of food that the mushroom would be consuming. Remember, they are heterotrophs; they have to consume food, and they don't do it by eating it in their mouths, right? They have to actually break it down with chemicals that they have in their hyphae or their cells, and when they break it down, they then can absorb it through the skin. Okay. So that is the stem. Of course, plants have stems as well. It's what they grow out of the ground with, very similar structures. The last thing is the gills, and we can't quite see them. In many mushrooms, you can. Some species of mushrooms, you can see them right from the here, and I think that has to do with maturity level too. I think this is not quite a mature mushroom, but the classic is the morel mushroom, and many of you probably cooked and eaten a morel mushroom. They're big, the brown mushrooms where you can see those classic mushroom gills at the bottom. So we have talked about the three main parts that I want to talk about. Now we're going to use a knife to cut through the middle of the mushroom. Wow, amazing, right? Classic mushroom you'd put on a pizza. Okay, and it's a little tough. I'm actually going to cut this part in half again, and and don't do this at home, folks, but I'm gonna cut the stem off, and then I'm gonna peel back a little bit of the cap. And don't do this at home. If you do this at home, like you want to do your own dissection, use a plastic knife. If we were in class, we'd be using a plastic knife. I do not have a plastic knife, and obviously, I trust myself with a regular knife, so I'm going to use that. But use a plastic knife if you want to do this at home. So I've peeled it away, and now you can see the classic, gills, right? So remember the mushroom here, like this. Okay, just part of the cap. Took away the stem, and I peeled back a little bit of the cap to see those classic gills. Okay. So, what are the gills for? The gills are where the spores are created, and then where they're released when the mushroom has decided it wants to release the spores. And those can be either through asexual or sexual reproduction, but the spores are what's going to be the main reproduction method of a mushroom, which is very unique. And only one other thing, which is a mushroom type protist, which we'll talk about in our next unit, or next unit, but our next lesson, which is going to be talking about protists next week. Uh, those are the only things that use spores to reproduce. So they're very unique. And I'm going to try something. I'm going to leave this. I heard if I leave this on a towel overnight, there'll be spore formation around it. And that is actually typically what scientists that study mushrooms use to identify mushrooms if they can. Okay, so we've talked about three main functions, structures and their functions: cap, stem, and gills. And hopefully this helped you learn a little bit more about mushrooms, which is one of the main funguses, and kind of, a little bit about their structures and how their structures help them function. Because the way that this is built helps it survive. If there was things on it or that it was made of that didn't help them survive, the structures were different in major ways, then they would be living a completely different life. So it's important to remember that the structure of a living thing determines the function of it, right? Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video about mushroom dissection and you learned a little bit more about mushrooms. And if you go out and look for mushrooms or search for mushrooms or search for any fungus, it is very important that you do not pick and eat any of these mushrooms. This one is an edible mushroom. There are several edible mushrooms. Only get the ones and eat the ones that you can find at a grocery store. It's very important that you do not uh, you know eat any mushroom or even pick or collect mushrooms unless you're very safe about it from the forest. So that will be it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day.